Honorable members, Minister, before you start again, I talk about the parliamentary words in the House. And I urge all members to observe the protocols. You may proceed, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I join with my colleagues on this side of the House and Mr. Schuman in supporting Budget 2023. This budget comes after the emergency budget of 2020 and the 2021 and 2022
Honorable Minister, the Honorable Member, Mr. Duncan, continue to shout, and Honorable Chief Whip, I would ask that you speak with the particular member. Go ahead, Honorable Minister, I start your clock. And the Honorable Chief Whip, the Honorable Mahipal is becoming a bit disgusting now. Honorable Minister, you may proceed starting now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said, this budget comes after the emergency budget of 2020 and the 2021 and 2022 budgets to rebalance Guyana after the 5 years of APNU AFC incompetence as a government. And it has set the foundation for its transformation, steadfastly, carefully, calculatedly, step by step, for the sustainable transformation of our nation, improving lives today, building prosperity for tomorrow. The vision laid out in our 2020 manifesto, led by the visionary leadership of President Muhammad Ali, Vice President Barack Obama, Prime Minister Mark Phillips, and supported by all of us on this side of the House and the electorate who voted us in, speaks to a future that brings hope, pride, and dignity for all of Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor, and sometimes not honor, of being through 32 budgets as a member of Parliament. I must say that gone are the debates, and I think you would support me in this, from the opposition PNC side then, with leaders like Desmond Hoyt, Winston Murray, Kenneth King, Faith Harding, and Derek Bernard, and yourself, Mr. Speaker, when you were MP for the United Force. They came with substance and were effective opposition members. Since 2012, the APNU AFC opposition has become irresponsible and reckless and lacking in substance during these debates, even when they were in government. Worse so in this budget, Mr. Speaker. Dare I say that the listening public, like we on this side of the House, have been subjected to the vitriol of the APNU AFC MPs, who appear to be living and nurtured in a bubble of intellectual opportunism and naysay, in some cases, sheer intellectual bankruptcy. Mr. Speaker, you know, I listened and I have this mental image in my brain of the witches in Macbeth. The three witches who sat over the cauldron and stirred the pot and stirred the pot. And so, Macbeth Shakespeare, when the three witches said double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, that is what you're doing. Always fire burn and cauldron bubble. Trouble, trouble. Mr. Speaker, that I think a rap singer may want to break that into a nice rap song. Might be appropriate because this is what they bring to Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I say intellectual opportunism as repeatedly as they have misquoted, misinformed about the contents of official regional and international reports. Mr. Speaker, let me just quickly go through some of these. They kept referring to the FAO report on Latin America and Caribbean on food security. The figure they keep banding around of 42% of the people in Guyana are not having a diet, do not have food security, are not eating properly, and not the figures for Guyana. It is the figures for the Latin American Caribbean region. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, in the same FAO report, they seem to have forgotten, or not read it actually, that Guyana places among 6 countries with the best nourishment rates in the Latin American Caribbean region. So, Mr. Speaker, this intellectual opportunism, and as I said, bankruptcy, I'll continue to show it. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a former member who has left his seat talk about the IMF Article 4, 2022. and castigated. But the Article 4 of 2022 report on Ghana says that public debt stood at 42.9% of the GDP at the end of 2021, one of the lowest in the Caribbean region. It also points out that the IMF noted the PPC government of Ghana's progress in strengthening Ghana's anti-corruption framework and fiscal transparency in the extractive industries. It pointed out and went on in a number of ways to explain that. Mr. Speaker, the IMF report also talked about in relation to the expenditure on public investment and construction, that this was a way to, quote, ease the cost of living pressures for the population. These investments can once again be seen in the 2023 budget with additional capital investments in key infrastructure projects. This level of public capital investment, as well as the authorities' commitment to a zero overall balance in the medium term, form the basis of a progressive and positive medium-term macro-fiscal framework as is laid out by the IMF in its 2022 level. With this level of expected investment, implementation with the tenders for large infrastructure projects allotted to international firms that will import capital goods and workers, inflation is expected to be contained in the medium term. I'm quoting all the time from the IMF. In addition to that, the IMF notes in relation to inflation that it expected it to rise to 9.4% by the end of 2022. However, it admits that efforts by the government of Guyana to manage to reduce the impact of many exogenous factors and ultimately reduce the actual rate of inflation as compared to the estimate rate of the IMF. Lastly, in comparison to the region, it notes that Ghana, it goes on to say that growth is higher in Ghana than in its regional partners, owing especially to the expanding oil and gas sector, which we know. Inflation is also reported as remaining subdued in comparison to regional peers. The fiscal performance of Ghana was better than in any other regional commodity exporters, and external borrowing remained low. Mr. Speaker, this document was misquoted in this House yesterday and gave a totally different picture, totally different. This is repeated what I call intellectual opportunism in the nicest and intellectual bankruptcy in the worst. I'm being very polite because the speaker's made it very clear certain words can't be used in here. So let's go on.
Honorable Minister, you had one beep already. Yes. You're responsible.
Mr. Speaker, the study of the socioeconomic impact of the closure of Gaisuco sugar estates on sugar workers in Guyana, an ILO document, which was published in January 2021 and was done by the University of Guyana as a contractor, Green Institute. This document, despite what the Honourable Member Mr. Ramjatan has said, it has found that the livelihoods of sugar workers who were laid off were severely compromised. The document goes on to show that even years later, some of the workers are still employed at the time of being interviewed, while most who did find jobs were doing so on a part-time or seasonal basis. The whole document is here, yet the Honourable Member made it seem as if the closure of their estates. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, I must remind the House that the former President, Mr. Granger, appointed a commission of inquiry into the sugar industry. And that commission of inquiry advised that any closure of any estate would have catastrophic repercussions, not only in the sugar workers, but the entire country. And that was totally ignored because the APNU AFC have a tendency of feeling they know it all. And they're dismissive of any opinion that is different than theirs, as the example today, with an opinion that's different from them, from Mr. Schuman, an honourable member of this House and Deputy Speaker of the House. This is a trend in the DNA of the APNU AFC. They cannot take people with different views. Mr. Speaker, there was a quote too on the Norwegian consultant. Consult this document I'm reading from, Review of the Amaila Falls Hydropower Project in Guyana, final report. This is dated 2016, December the 12th, and this is what it says. Mr. Speaker, on page 35 of 49, this is page 35. Mr. Speaker, it points out the table, and they have a table showing which were the options of Guyana: Amaila, Kayachor, Truba, Upper Mass, Al Saru, and Okoblu. And they grade them in their suitability and ability to provide hydropower for Guyana. It says that the table that Amaila Falls was the most attractive project from a technical, economic point of view and from an environmental point of view. Yet people quoted Norwegian report and distorted and totally conveyed the wrong impression. Mr. Speaker, all of these documents, Mr. Speaker, I will lay over because I sincerely hope that the honourable members will read. Mr. Speaker, the conclusion on page 37 says, from a financial and economic point of view, the development of Amaila Falls seems to be the optimal solution for meeting the electricity demand in Guyana, despite the risk. Mr. Speaker, I think I've shown enough that the level of intellectual opportunism and bankruptcy. But Mr. Speaker, I only named a few. One member got up yesterday and proposed mortgage relief from the opposition as if this was a new idea. But the honourable member didn't seem to read the budget, which is not surprising, because on page of the budget, it points out that the mortgage relief on page 92 of 101, I guess it was tiring reading so much, no? So that 92 of 2001, the mortgage relief proposal to increase it from 12 million to from 15 million to 20 million is right here. Obviously, the member never read it. Mr. Speaker, I use the phrase intellectual bankruptcy because how does one explain when those on the opposite side, meaning APNU AFC, cannot imagine a Guyana that is on the move, that is transformed to be a modern model nation with a low-carbon, diversified economy, with transportation links, a new city, Deepwater Harbor, a new suspension bridge across the Demerara River, a new bridge across the Corentyne River, where our people can live in new housing schemes and new emerging peri-urban and urban centers, where we can produce food so everyone can have a healthy diet, where our children and grandchildren can achieve their dreams, and when no one is left behind, and we care for the elderly and differently abled under the banner of One Guyana. Why is it so difficult for you to support that? You know, Mr. Speaker, it is that the problem, and I'll explain it, Mr. Speaker. I'll explain why APNU AFC has problems. They have fed themselves a diet of a vision, a view that is consumed with victimology, fear, division, and race. Mr. Speaker, I have wondered why they couldn't imagine this. And not only can't imagine it, adamantly refuse to be part of it, be part of this vision, and refuse to be part of the transformation process. But worse yet, they try to undermine the progress, to halt the progress by whatever means. My conclusions are that the APNU AFC and their mother party, the PNC, has never gone through soul searching to really understand their role. They have fed their supporters a diet for over 50 years of victimology, racial division, fear, and fiction and untruths that they cannot extricate themselves from and change course. They are so buried psychologically, physically, emotionally, intellectually in this morass that they've created over the 50 years, that they don't know how to extricate themselves. They don't even comprehend that they apologize for all the wrongdoings, all the rigged elections, all the victimology of other Guyanese, of all the violence that was portrayed in this country, and the worst and most recent, the 2020 elections. They may have a hope for the future. They may have a chance for the future. No, of course not, they won't. They have fed their supporters this. But the problem is, Mr. Speaker, they've descended to such depths of inequity, of depravity, that the more the Guyanese people want progress, and the more the people respond to the government's programs, whether housing, gold, grow, win, part-time jobs, small business grants, black-bellied sheeps, whatever you sheep, and roosters, whatever you call those roosters, they go into a tailspin. They don't know what to do, except to pull the one card left in the pack. The one card left in the pack. And you know what that is? Race. And yet they refuse to recognize how isolated they are. That the people are moving forward and they're caught, stuck, going at some mileage that they can't even catch up with the people. People want to move forward in this country. They don't want to be dragged constantly into this unpalatable cauldron of venom and toxicity. This cauldron of venom and toxicity. Our people don't want to hear this. They've had enough. The speeches in this parliament, this budget, people are saturated. They don't want to hear it anymore. They want to go on with their lives, to have a house with some land, a car, that their kids are able to get good education and access jobs, or create small businesses or farms, and fish. They want some gainful economic activity. Mr. Speaker, that the women and young women are not being left behind in this country. You haven't even read the signal right about what women are doing in this country. You haven't read it right. You're off course because you're blinded. You're jaundiced. You're looking at the country and the people with jaundiced eyes because it's all race-baited. Mr. Speaker, 60% of the gold scholarships are women, the recipients. 44% of the household recipients are female small businesses. And Mr. Speaker, the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index 2021 to 2022, Guyana ranks 35 out of 146 countries that was studied in the 2022. This is a significant improvement from a ranking of 53 in 2021. Imagine 18 spaces we jumped in 1 year. Imagine. How did we do that? Mr. Speaker, we rank 17th globally for legislators, senior officials, and managers. Our literacy rate is an exceptional level. Guyana is tied for first place for enrollment in both secondary and tertiary education under the World Economic Forum. Guyana's health and survival. Guyana is placed first for sex ratio at birth and also placed first on the global scale for life expectancy with other countries. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who's coming late, and I'm sure he'll respond to me, on 19th of January in a press conference, says, Budget 2023 confirms that the government is clueless, incompetent, uncaring, and anti-poor. Goes on to say that the budget confirms that the government is more interested in serving its business colonies than in living the quality of the life of Guyanese people. It goes on to point out that PPP will not eliminate poverty, will not ensure that families can live comfortable and happy lives. And then on the eve of the budget opening, the debate, on Monday, January the 16th, there's another press statement that comes out from the office of the PNC statement that says, Guyana has, for instance, and I'm quoting Mr. Speaker, one of the highest rates of poverty and inequality, infant mortality, maternal mortality, suicide, child malnutrition, and preventable deaths. Our country has one of the lowest levels of life expectancy, numeracy and literacy, education performance, and access to quality health care. These indicators are not abstract statistics. Mr. Speaker, I have presented you with statistics. The problem again with the opposition, it is just verbiage supported by nothing. It is sitting on quicksand. You cannot, because everything we're looking at data-wise, we have a long way to go. We're a small developing country. But we are making progress. And this is under the PPC because you took us back in the 5 years. You took hundreds and thousands of dollars from each family with all those taxation that you brought on our people and VAT for essential food items. And yet you come here sanctimoniously and pretend that you did a good job. Mr. Speaker, in access to finance, Guyana records near equal rights with women. And in terms of inheritance rights, women and daughters and widows in the report have equal rights. Mr. Speaker, again, more statistics. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC does not comprehend this forward and progressive movement of our people. In fact, as I said, they cannot comprehend it. It's unfathomable to them, while at the same time each of the MPs benefit from the measures the government has introduced, as they should. The people like the budget members. Our people like the budget measures. They understand these will bring benefits to their lives. And they want more, and they will. That is normal, and they will get more. But that they understand that the country is progressing. Just look around you, man. As I said, you come to the House with tainted glasses. You need new glasses. Maybe you should join Mr. Frank Anthony's eye care program and get your sight corrected. Because street lights are going up where they weren't any. Roads are going up where they weren't any. Bridges are going up where they weren't. Houses are going up. Just if you want to have an aerial view of the housing program, take a flight from Ogle and fly over Cummings Lodge and Industry. This is where you see progress. This is where, Mr. Speaker, our people will always want more. And we will produce, and we will give them as they deserve. But, Mr. Speaker, they know now, in 2023, that things are better and far, far, far better than under the APNU AFC. One member on the other side said the government had its boot on the necks of the people, government us. This was a Freudian slip, Mr. Speaker. It was the APNU AFC boot that was on the neck of the Guyanese people, that with 200 taxes took out $200,000 out of the pockets of each family, that scrapped the cash care program and took billions of dollars over their term of office out of the pockets of school children in our country. The country is alive. And the APNU AFC boot has been taken off the neck of the Guyanese people. Our people can breathe again, and they want to grasp the opportunities that are available to them. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC MPs came to this House and talk about friends and families and cronies. And my colleague Vikram showed how all of Guyanese are friends and families and new friends. But whilst the APNU AFC MPs desperately, in much of their presentation, was defending their record of government, they could not answer. If they had done all the things they claimed to have done, how come the Guyanese people rejected them at the electorate? How come they weren't brought back into government? Mr. Speaker, that's something they need to go and have a cathartic moment in their parties. Mr. Speaker, they calculatedly omitted to tell the House that their government had the highest level of executive lawlessness in the history of our nation, with consistent violations of the Constitution over the entire term of office, which escalated after the no-confidence motion and the 2020 elections, where the head of the OS Observer Mission, former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, reported to the OS Permanent Council in July 2020 that, quote, that he had never witnessed such a transparent effort to steal an election, unquote. The audit reports of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 are filled with case after case of breaches of the Procurement Act and financial regulations during the happening time. The PPC report on the new Denmark Harbour Bridge exposed the collusion of a minister and the entire cabinet to cancel a tender with over 20 foreign and local companies and give it the contract to a company that never bid and continued after the exposure, after the report of the BBC, to continue to pay that company an additional $126 million from the Denmark Harbour Bridge Board. Seriously, you come here and try to play holier than thou? You come here trying to pretend that you're pure? Mr. Speaker, while I was in opposition, I probably had some more time than I may have now, but I compiled a list of scandals up to 2019, 57 scandals, Mr. Speaker. Please notice scandals with procurement, with executive lawlessness, with cronyism, and paying companies for money when they hadn't produced the work, etc., and paying their financiers. And regrettably, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of persons in this House who are involved in these things then, and some are before the courts. So let me leave that as it is. You know who you are, and we know who you are. Mr. Speaker, the April 2020, the Auditor General report did a special report which was tabled in the House called COVID-19 Pandemic Assistance Voucher Program. That was tabled in this House, and it deals with the period of April 2020 when COVID came along, and that what efforts the government supposedly did to bring relief to our people. I wish to remind you that you had to go and register at the Burnham Institute in, what's it called, that place, Kwame? Opposite Cultural Center, which was the former president's home, which he donated as the Burnham Institute. People had to apply there for the vouchers. What did the audit report find? Number one, people, and I'm reading, Mr. Speaker, I'm reading, quoting, page, italics 3. This is in the executive summary. People who needed assistance were denied. Over 9,000 of the 11,000 qualified applicants did not receive vouchers. Mr. Speaker, out of 9,000 out of 11,000 never got the money. And officials have not explained why. The program excluded persons in the hinterland regions. What? Instead, they promised hampers. What? Number two, payments worth millions were not verified. Vouchers totaling 56 million were not checked before paying suppliers. This weakness could have resulted in overpayment to suppliers and eligible persons not given much needed relief. Three, vouchers not used were left unsecured. Over 3,000 unused vouchers valued at least $90 million were unsecured on a desk. As a result, the vouchers could have been easy access and used to obtain supplies. And it goes on to talk about the weak information data system to track and to keep records of what happened. This, of course, I'm sure will become an issue of the PAC. Mr. Speaker, what is clear? Mr. Speaker, they said repeatedly in this House that they came in and there was no money. Again, intellectual bankruptcy. Because we left, and all the Bank of Guyana and all the reports show that $780 million of foreign currency reserves were left in May 2015. And by 2020, August, it was down to around $200 million US. Where the money gone? What did you do with it? You don't trouble your reserves. You're very careful with your foreign currency reserves. In fact, you're supposed to have you try to keep at least 3 months reserves in stock for a rainy day. Mr. Speaker, the other area that preserves us, helps us to have a rainy day and to save and to hold on to money, There's the gold reserve scandal, Mr. Speaker. I see someone writing all the time in the paper as part of the gold board. A sanctimonious as usual. But there's a gold reserve scandal. These are our assets of the people, our savings for a rainy day. We left 13 billion Ghana dollars worth of gold reserves. And Mr. Speaker, by 2020, it was less than 200 million Ghana dollars. And you know what it is? You know what they did? They took the money, the gold, and they sold it when the gold price was lowest on the world market. Lowest on the world market. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the height of incompetence, the height of irresponsible leadership. You took the two pillars that we have in case of instability, in case of exogenous factors that you can fall back on, and they exploited it. They squandered it with very little of a trail left. Mr. Speaker, the procurement laws, in contrast, Mr. Speaker, in contrast, the procurement laws have been upheld and the constitutional oversight bodies, the Audit Office of Ghana and the PPC are functioning. The judiciary is functioning. The Parliament office is functioning. The legislators are a different issue. The APNU AFC claim they got there with this race card that Indo-Guyanese are getting contracts. But
Honorable Minister, I have to play the time card. You need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the honourable member be granted a 5 minutes extension.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Minister, you have 5 minutes to conclude.
They talk about Indo-Guyanese getting contracts and pointing to this apartheid that they like to refer to. But Mr. Speaker, I have a question. I sit in cabinet, I see contracts coming out. How am I to know that a company named ABC and JW and NNS or ABC, how do I know the ethnicity of a company? How does one deal with the ethnicity of a company? I mean, this opportunism, bankruptcy, intellectual opportunism is so offensive. So offensive. As far as I'm concerned, and if you go to the thousands of small contracts at the local government level, regional and ministerial tender boards, contracts are given to all ethnic groups who have a right to bid and be considered. And if responsive, they get the contract. Mr. Speaker, they make fun and make light of the increase on the threshold from 75 to 85. But this will bring, for all taxpayers, by the relief of deducting $85,000 for those of you who earn more than $85,000, over $1 million in relief in taxation. Mr. Speaker, they say there's nothing in the budget. And I can predict that when Mr. Norton gets up, the quotes I gave from the press statements will be the line he carries. Nothing there. Nothing to deal with poverty. Nothing to deal with this. The race card will be pulled out, and the cronies will be pulled out. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, they lack any comprehension of how the economy works and the budget's measures bring relief. I ask the honourable members to look at an excellent article in the Mirror newspaper by Dr. Leslie Ramsamy on the budget and the measures that affect the Guyanese people. And you will hear our luminaries coming afterwards, particularly my dear friend, Dr. Ashney, who will tell you how the measures, we are giving billions of dollars into the pockets of people. Unlike what you did, you took money out of people's pockets. We are putting money back in. And we've done it in 2020, 21, 22, 23, and for the next 20 years when we stay in government. Mr. Speaker, hope and optimism. Why don't they get it? 600 companies have been registered with the local content secretariat. 1,000 small contractors have been encouraged and assisted to get registered and bid for small contracts across the country. Each of these small contractors, 1,000 of them, hire at least 5 people. Creates jobs. 1,200 small grants, according to my colleague, Minister Waldron, received from small business in 2022. 40% increase than before. The Amerindian village councils, no matter what Mr. Henry says, are being given contracts to build roads and infrastructure in communities. And Warramadon has a contract, the same region where Upper Maz, where the honorable member comes from, to build a new primary school. And they're doing it. Mr. Speaker, everywhere you go, there's change. The architecture is changing. The landscape of each village, each area, each part of this country is changing rapidly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the level of race and racial innuendos was sickening in this debate. Deliberately putting one area of the country and one ethnic group against each other is reprehensible. They cast empty barrels around, dropping laced comments about discrimination, but they refused to bring one single case of such. Mr. Speaker, the people know you better than you know yourselves. They know you better than you know yourselves, because they've experienced you from 1964 to 1992. They've experienced you from 15 to 2020. But they also experienced you in 2011 when you got the 1 seat more and we were in government. They saw you cut $90 billion out of the budget for the Amerindian Development Fund, for airstrips, for salaries for public servants. They saw all of that. So I repeat, the people know you better than you know yourselves. Mr. Speaker, this is a visible, accessible, accountable, communicative government to all Guyanese. We are based on a policy of inclusivity and participation. And we brought in new initiatives, such as Men on Mission, for example, to fight domestic violence. Why aren't you standing with us? This is not, as Priya Manik-Chan said, our political issue. Presidential Youth Advisory Council to involve young people across this country in learning to take on leadership and solve issues. The National Resource Fund, which has been congratulated by the IMF as we amended it in last year to allow for participant oversight. The Leader Opposition has to name his person on one committee. I'm not afraid that he's done that yet. The 2 names came from the Parliamentary Committee as required. But Mr. Speaker, the one thing is that this issue of our oil revenue comes here. And we never touched the money. Never touched the money until that act was brought back and passed in this House in 2022. You don't think it might have been tempting? If it was in your hands, you would have gone with it already. But Mr. Speaker, I predict, Mr. Speaker, I'm not a Farsi, as they say in Creole, I'm not a Farsi, not meaning Farsi, meaning I can see in the future. But I do say today, when the Leader Opposition speaks, and I'm followed by Mrs. Hughes and Mrs. Valder Lawrence, that we will continue to hear the 3 witches turning the cauldron. We will hear the 3 witches stirring the cauldron. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble. Thank you.